Hey everyone, it's Yas, and today we're diving into something a lot of you have asked about, what narcissists actually do when they get caught being guilty of something. Before I get into it, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss future episodes. So let's think about this for a second. What do you honestly expect a narcissist to do once they're caught red-handed? Well, I can tell you right now, they are not going to sit there, look you in the eye, and say something like, "You're right, I'm sorry, I was wrong." That kind of transparency and accountability simply isn't in their playbook. Taking ownership of what they did, that's basically off the table from the start. What a lot of narcissists will do instead is rage out. This is especially true if you're dealing with someone who's overt, grandiose, or leaning into malignant territory. The moment you confront them with something they're actually guilty of, they explode. They flip out on you, and the goal, whether they're doing it consciously or not, is to scare you into backing off. And I want to be honest with you here. If you're dealing with a malignant narcissist specifically, this can actually turn dangerous. So please be careful if you're confronting one of these people with evidence of something they did, because there's a real chance things could escalate into something physical. What's really happening when they rage like that is a form of reverse psychology. They're banking on the idea that if they yell loud enough, if they act shocked and outraged enough, saying things like, "I can't believe you'd even accuse me of cheating," or "How dare you say that to me after everything I've done for you?" And yes, that "after everything I've done for you" line comes up constantly, that eventually you'll start to doubt your own reality. They gaslight you so relentlessly that you actually start second-guessing whether they're guilty at all, even when you're holding the proof in your own hands. You start thinking, well, if they're not guilty, why would they be reacting this intensely? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they really are innocent. They're not innocent. What's happening is a calculated mind game. When narcissists get caught, and I mean really caught, hand in the cookie jar, no way around it, a lot of them respond with this kind of explosive rage, specifically because they've been cornered. I've actually heard stories where someone confronted a narcissist after catching them, and the situation escalated to something truly tragic. That's how volatile these confrontations can get. So when you've got solid proof, when they genuinely have nowhere left to hide, and the yelling and screaming isn't working to shut you down, they're going to shift into full intimidation mode. What they're really trying to do at that point is silence you. They want you to back off, to doubt yourself, to feel like you're the unreasonable one for even bringing it up. "How could you possibly accuse me of this?" becomes their whole posture. And then comes the next move, blame shifting. They'll turn it around on you completely, saying something like, "If you're accusing me of this, it's probably because you're the one actually doing it. You're just projecting your own guilt onto me." Suddenly, you're the liar. You're the gaslighter. You're the narcissist in their story. They rage first, and then they flip the entire script, turning every accusation you've made back onto you, essentially trying to prove that you're the guilty party instead of them. And they will never, under any circumstances, take real accountability. They'll swear on their mother's life, on a deceased parent, on a Bible, in front of a priest if they have to, but they will not admit guilt. Not really. Not in a way that means anything. I actually want to share something that happened to me personally, because it's such a clear, real-world example of this pattern in action, even outside of romantic relationships. I was dealing with someone who I believe was either overt or malignant. I honestly couldn't tell you which for sure. It was actually the owner of an auto shop I brought my car to. Long story short, his team messed up the electrical wiring on my car during a repair, and when I went to pick it up, the check engine light was on. I calmly told the owner, "Listen, this light wasn't on before I brought the car in." And this man completely lost it on me. He started screaming, cursing, giving me obscene gestures. He went absolutely wild. And I remember thinking to myself, why is this grown man acting like this over a simple observation? It's because he was guilty. His mechanic had replaced a water pump or something similar and didn't rewire everything correctly afterward, which is exactly why that light came on. But instead of just owning that mistake, he went nuclear on me. And here's the thing, I walked in completely calm, completely reasonable. I'd always been polite to this guy because, honestly, I could tell he had a short fuse, and I figured as long as the work got done, it wasn't worth the friction. But he went so far off the rails that I genuinely considered calling the police. That's how extreme it got. For a moment, I actually started questioning myself. I thought, wait, was that light maybe already on before I brought the car in? Did I miss it? And then I remembered, no, absolutely not, because I specifically waited to bring the car in until I had the time, and I would never have delayed bringing it in if a warning light had already been on. I told him exactly that, and he just stood there with this miserable, stubborn look on his face, insisting the light had already been on. What he was actually doing was trying to intimidate me into dropping it because he didn't want the hassle or the cost of fixing the wiring properly. And that, right there, is exactly the pattern narcissists follow. They rage at you specifically to make you back off, because deep down, they know they're guilty. Now, if you're dealing with a covert narcissist instead, the response looks completely different. A covert narcissist is far more likely to just say, "You're crazy," and walk away entirely. They vanish. They disappear on you completely. Because when a covert narcissist gets caught, the very last thing they want is confrontation. They avoid it at all costs. But don't think that means they're taking the high road. Behind your back, they'll go smear your name to everyone they can, reframing the entire situation so that you become the guilty one in everyone else's eyes. They'll rewrite the whole narrative until people around you start believing you're the unstable one making baseless accusations, when in reality, you're the one who caught them. That's how it plays out. They twist everything, cast you as the villain, go completely silent and distant with you directly, while working overtime behind the scenes to make sure nobody believes you if you ever do speak up. So, to sum up the pattern, when narcissists get caught being guilty of something, you're generally going to see one of a few responses. They rage and blow up at you, they blame shift and try to make the whole thing your fault, or they play the "you're crazy" card, disappear, and then smear you to anyone who'll listen, painting themselves as the victim and you as the unstable liar. Let's say, for example, you catch them cheating and you've got airtight proof, photos, messages, whatever it might be. They still won't own it. Even faced with a literal picture, they'll insist it's not them or claim you photoshopped it to frame them. They will say absolutely anything, no matter how far-fetched, just to avoid sitting with that accountability and facing that shame. And on top of that, they'll go tell other people stories about you, that you're unstable, that you're insecure, that the only reason you keep accusing them is because you're probably the one actually cheating. They will tear your reputation apart to anyone who'll listen. And here's the cruel part, because they get to other people first. When you eventually try to tell your side of the story, people may already be looking at you sideways, thinking you're the dishonest one, even though you're completely innocent. The narcissist has already beaten you to the punch, already planted the seed that you're the problem. It can feel like there's no way to win because these people are constantly running around behind your back trying to control the narrative before you ever get the chance to. That's ultimately why you can never really resolve a genuine conflict with a narcissist. They are fundamentally incapable of owning being wrong. Every single time, they'll do one of three things: deflect the blame onto you, run and disappear, or go smear your name to everyone around you preemptively, because deep down, they're afraid you're going to expose them first. So they beat you to it, painting you as the unstable one before you even get a chance to speak. Given all of that, here's my honest advice. You don't need a confession out of a narcissist to know the truth. If you already have solid proof of what they did, you don't need them to sit there and admit it to your face, because that's not going to happen. Your proof is what you've personally seen and heard with your own eyes and ears. Trust that. Trust your own gut, because that's genuinely all the confirmation you actually need. You are never going to get real transparency from a narcissist. When they're guilty, expect avoidance and intimidation as their default responses. As I mentioned earlier, that often shows up as yelling and screaming designed to make you back down, to shut you up, to make you drop the whole issue. And if you're dealing with a covert narcissist specifically, expect stonewalling instead, them simply walking away and refusing to engage at all. Picture this: you confront them about cheating or whatever the issue happens to be. A covert narcissist will likely just say, "You're crazy," and walk straight out of the room. They're not going to go back and forth debating it with you, because confrontation is something they actively avoid. They'll disappear for a few days, sometimes longer, and then casually resurface acting like absolutely nothing happened, purely because they don't want to revisit the topic or ever be forced into taking accountability for it. So, again, your proof, your evidence, whatever you personally witnessed, that's what matters, and that's all you actually need. You don't need a confession, because roughly 99% of the time, you are simply never going to get one. I actually dealt with a narcissist myself once, where I made it my mission to get him to admit the truth. And I'm telling you, it took months. literally months of persistent effort just to wear him down to the point where he finally admitted something. And the only reason it worked at all was because he realized I was genuinely walking away from him for good, and he knew I meant it this time. That's the only reason I got any admission out of him at all. And even then, it wasn't the full truth. I found out about certain things he'd done, but he was never completely honest or transparent about the full extent of it. They're never fully forthcoming, even in those rare moments when they do crack a little. And usually that only happens when they're desperate, when they sense they're actually losing you, and they're grasping at anything to try to hold on. Some narcissists, honestly, will never admit guilt no matter what. It really depends on the individual, but in the vast majority of cases, you should expect them to never own it. I remember another narcissist I dealt with who actually told me, "We could go on a talk show together," or "I'll take a lie detector test to prove his innocence." And for a second, I thought to myself, well, if he's genuinely willing to take a polygraph, maybe he really is innocent. But no, that was pure gaslighting. He was guilty as could be. All of that talk was just smoke and mirrors, designed to make me think, surely someone willing to take a lie detector test must be telling the truth. But the reality was, he knew perfectly well he'd never actually follow through and take that test. And even if he had taken it and failed, he would have found some way to discredit the results, claiming the test itself was flawed or unreliable. That's the kind of games these people play constantly, which is exactly why you shouldn't waste your energy expecting a genuine confession out of them. At some point, you just have to reach the place where you say to yourself, "Not today? I already know exactly what you are. I don't need to hear it come out of your mouth. I have my proof right here and I'm done. I'm not sticking around for a liar or for someone who's guilty and refuses to own it." At the end of the day, it's a no-win situation trying to get accountability from a narcissist. The best move is simply to walk away and trust what you've personally seen and heard, along with what trustworthy people around you have observed too. When it comes to guilt, understand going in that the overwhelming majority of the time, they will never admit it. And if you're waiting for that moment, the moment when they finally look you in the eyes and say, "Yes, I hurt you. Yes, I was wrong. Yes, I understand what I did," you may be waiting for something that never comes. That's one of the hardest lessons to accept when you've been hurt by someone who refuses to take responsibility. You naturally expect guilt to work a certain way. If someone hurts you, you assume they will eventually recognize it. Maybe they'll think about what happened later that night. Maybe they'll replay the conversation in their head. Maybe they'll realize they crossed a line. Maybe they'll feel uncomfortable with themselves and come back with a sincere apology. That's how emotionally accountable people tend to operate. They can look at their own behavior, tolerate the discomfort of admitting they were wrong, and make an effort to repair the damage. But not everyone handles guilt that way. For someone who is intensely invested in protecting their self-image, admitting wrongdoing can feel like an attack on their entire identity. Instead of thinking, "I behaved badly," they may experience the situation as, "If I admit I behaved badly, then I have to admit I'm the kind of person who does bad things." And that distinction matters, because when protecting the self-image becomes more important than repairing the relationship, accountability becomes extremely difficult. So instead of guilt turning inward, it can get redirected outward. They may blame you. They may tell you that you provoked them. They may say you misunderstood their intentions. They may focus on something you did months ago. They may bring up your mistakes as if your mistakes somehow erase theirs. Suddenly, you're no longer discussing what happened. You're defending your character. And this is where many people get trapped. You think, if I can just explain how much this hurt me, they'll understand. So you explain. They dismiss it. You explain again. They become defensive. You provide examples. They accuse you of holding grudges. You show them exactly what they said. They tell you that you're obsessed with the past. Eventually, you're exhausted, and they're still standing there insisting that the problem is your reaction rather than their behavior. At some point, you have to recognize the difference between someone who doesn't understand your pain and someone who doesn't want to take responsibility for causing it. Those are not the same thing. Sometimes the person understands perfectly well. They simply don't want the consequences that come with acknowledging it, because acknowledgement creates responsibility. Responsibility creates expectations, and expectations require change. If they admit that they lied, then they have to explain why. If they admit that they manipulated you, then they have to confront what that means. If they admit that they intentionally hurt you, then they can no longer comfortably position themselves as the victim of the entire story. So denial becomes easier, deflection becomes easier, silence becomes easier, blame becomes easier, and sometimes the most confusing response of all is a partial apology. You might hear, "No, I'm sorry you felt that way." Notice what's missing. There's no ownership of the behavior. The focus is placed on your feelings rather than their actions. Or perhaps you hear, "I'm sorry, but you made me angry." That isn't accountability either. It's an apology attached to an explanation designed to move responsibility back onto you. A genuine apology doesn't require perfection. People can make mistakes, become defensive, say the wrong thing, and still eventually come back and say, "I was wrong, I shouldn't have treated you that way, I understand why it hurt you, and I'm going to change how I handle this." That's what accountability sounds like. And more importantly, accountability eventually becomes visible through behavior. Because words can be performed, behavior is harder to fake consistently. This is why you have to stop making your healing dependent on someone else's confession. You may never receive the apology you deserved. You may never hear them describe the situation accurately. You may never see them acknowledge the damage they caused. And accepting that possibility doesn't mean you're saying what happened was acceptable. It means you're refusing to hand them control over your closure. That's an important distinction. Closure isn't necessarily the moment someone else finally admits what they did. Sometimes closure is the moment you stop needing them to admit it. You already know what happened. You remember how you felt. You remember what changed in you. You remember how many times you tried to communicate, repair, forgive, and understand. You don't need another person to certify your experience before you're allowed to trust it. And this is especially important when you've spent a long time around someone who constantly challenges your perception. When you're repeatedly told that you're too sensitive, too emotional, too demanding, too dramatic, or simply remembering things incorrectly, you can eventually start looking outside yourself for permission to believe what you experienced. You start collecting evidence, screenshots, dates, messages, conversations. You build a case because you think that if the evidence becomes undeniable enough, they will finally surrender and admit the truth. But healing doesn't require winning the courtroom. You don't need to convince the person who hurt you that you were hurt. You need to become clear about what their behavior means for your future. That's where your power begins returning. Instead of asking, "How can I make them feel guilty?" ask, "What does their refusal to take responsibility tell me?" Instead of asking, "Why won't they apologize?" ask, "What pattern am I looking at?" Instead of asking, "When will they finally understand?" ask, "How much longer am I willing to participate in this cycle?" Those questions move you away from their internal world and back toward your own, and that's where your attention belongs. You cannot control whether another person experiences guilt. You cannot force remorse. You cannot manufacture empathy. You cannot argue someone into accountability, but you can decide what you will accept. You can establish boundaries. You can stop explaining yourself endlessly. You can stop returning to the same conversation hoping for a different conclusion. You can stop confusing their regret with your healing. Most importantly, you can recognize that their refusal to admit what they did doesn't erase what happened. Sometimes the strongest response isn't another explanation. It's clarity. You don't need them to confess. You don't need them to agree. You don't need them to understand every detail. You need to understand yourself. Understand what you experienced. Understand what you will no longer tolerate. Understand what patterns you're no longer willing to repeat. And once you understand that, their guilt becomes far less important, because the goal was never to make them feel bad enough. The goal was to stop allowing their behavior to make you feel small. I hope this was helpful for you, and more importantly, I hope it reminds you of something simple but powerful. Your healing does not have to wait for someone else's accountability. Sometimes the apology never arrives. Sometimes the explanation never makes sense. Sometimes the person who caused the wound never becomes capable of understanding its depth, and you can still heal. You can still move forward. You can still rebuild your confidence. You can still create a life where their inability to take responsibility no longer determines how much space they occupy in your mind. Because eventually, you stop waiting for them to admit the truth, and you start living as though you already know it. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and if you're interested in coaching, there's a link in my bio. Just know I have limited availability right now since I'll be away for a while, so make sure to book ahead through my site.